Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Emily Bryan. I'm Group Head of Marketing at Amberjack. I'm not doing much today. I'm just going to facilitate the session, but thank you so much for joining webinar today, which is our Future Potential Model 2.0, Identifying Talent Who Will Thrive in the Future World of Work. So really excited to be able to share sort of the next stage and evolvement of our future potential model, which some of you may already be aware of, but many might be new to. So Martin's going to guide you through that. But just a couple of housekeeping things. So we will share the recording to the session after we've finished, and included in that we will give links to the papers that Martin will be making reference to throughout, and also the videos that you'll get to see. We will be having a Q&A at the end, so please do pop your questions into that. I will be monitoring it, and we'll field those questions to Martin at the end. So without further ado, I will hand across to Martin, and yeah, I'll catch up with you at the end.
Thank you very much, Emily, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining this session. My name is Martin Kavanagh. I'm a chartered occupational psychologist and head of assessment at Amberjack. So absolutely delighted to be talking to you this afternoon. As Emily said, this is essentially the sort of external launch of our new thinking around how we assess potential and our thinking around how we identify talent who will thrive in the future of work. I'm going to be talking for about 40 minutes, so we'll have plenty of time at the end of the session for questions and answers for those who want to do that there. And I'll also provide my contact details at the end of the session for people who prefer to just contact me directly rather than raise any questions they might have in this format. So in terms of what I'm going to cover today, I'm going to start off by talking about why this matters now, why there's been a burning platform to look at how we assess full potential. I'm going to talk about how talent assessment has evolved and have a little bit of a look back at where we were as recently as 10 years ago and thinking about just how much the picture has changed. I'm going to talk about a talent profile that we've been talking a lot about at Amberjack recently, which is the creative generalist, and what that means in terms of the future of work. I will introduce the Future Potential Model 2.0 and the pillars of it, so you get a little bit more information on that. And then I'll start to look at the pillars in action and start to explore how we can really start to use this model. And finally, I'll just end. There are loads of practical applications to our new thinking and our new approach, but I will just flag a couple of the key practical applications to get you thinking about things that you can take back into your organization or potentially continue the conversation with us here at Amberjack about. And then, as I mentioned, there will be a question and answer session at the end. So for those of you who don't know a huge amount about Amberjack, it is worth saying that we specialize in volume recruitment, but particularly in early careers processes. So graduate, apprentice, school leaver, those types of volume activities. So when I'm talking, I will be focusing a lot on those sorts of environments and those sorts of markets. But hopefully, as I'm speaking, you will see that a lot of what we're talking about and the models and tools that I'm referring to will equally apply to experienced higher volume roles as well, which we also support clients with. So why does this matter now? And I just want to talk about, as I say, the sort of history of talent assessment quite briefly, so you keep this in mind as I'm going through the session. So in a previous life, around 10 years ago, I was a verified assessor for the British Psychological Society, which meant I could train people in how to use psychometric assessments and other tools and make sure that the quality of materials was right for those purposes. And most assessment providers would have this or a statement similar to this in their training materials. This was a very commonly held view and led to the sort of rise of competency models and all the rest of it, which is a candidate's past performance is the best predictor of future performance. Now, I would say particularly when you're looking at early careers, this statement is really quite problematic. You wouldn't expect someone who's fresh out of an academic system to have a huge amount uh, of experience to call upon and to use in which to make a judgment on how they will perform in the future. And I know, having looked at who's attending today, many of you have acted as assessors for early career processes. You'll be in situations like myself where you're asking an individual, for example, tell me about a time when you've led a group. Now, funnily enough, I found the feedback from the assessment centre I completed when I myself was looking for a graduate role when I started at BT, and the feedback form said I was able to demonstrate my leadership capability by talking about how I led the trombone section in the youth band that I was in. Now, in all honesty, all I did was hand out music at the start of rehearsals and point to where people should be in the music if I indeed knew myself, which wasn't always the case. It wasn't anything to do with my potential. I had those opportunities I was able to talk about in an interview. So I stood out compared to people who were perhaps giving more painful examples of when they led a group exercise where they use the word we a lot and they aren't able to really make it clear what they were doing versus what their colleagues were doing. They didn't have the same experiences to call upon. So that was a really problematic statement. But we've moved on a long way from that statement. And you can see how far we've moved in 10 years, because now quotes are things like this from the World Economic Forum. So roles are changing faster than organizations can predict. So even if past behavior was a good predictor of future performance, we don't even know what future performance will look like. So you might be looking at this slide a little bit distracted by the picture on the right, which, with his permission, my son Alex has allowed me to use his image in this slide. He actually wanted to join me in presenting on the webinar. He got very excited about me talking about him at work, but I had to manage his expectations on that. So being a parent really makes you think about your own career journey and what you really want for your children. So I had a very straightforward route, which was, I would say, probably seen as the quite a fairly typical route when I was going through graduate programs. So I finished my A levels. I went straight to university. I did an undergraduate degree in psychology. I then went straight on with no gap year to a master's in occupational psychology. And then again, with no gap year, I went straight into a graduate program at BT, where I was using my occupational psychology knowledge. Now, I am one of four children, and whilst when I was growing up, I felt we had the illusion of control. When I look back at it, all of my siblings followed a similar path. So my sister she did an economics degree, then a master's in transport economics, and she's now a transport economist. My brother did a master's in mathematics. He is now an actuary. So I think my natural inclination is to be thinking about, well, what sort of roles can I encourage Alex to do? How can I get him into the right sort of environments to set him up for success in the best possible way? But I think the way the world is changing, and this quote from the World Economic Forum sums it up, that is incredibly difficult to do. I'm not able to manage that and make that happen. And I think that's one of the things that's made me quite uncomfortable about the emergence of AI, that lack of ability to predict what perhaps the future world of work would look like. So I'll now come on to, with that context in mind, sort of Amberjack's assessment story and how we've been using that wider picture to shape our thinking. So Amberjack, the vision, which really sold Amberjack to me. So I joined Amberjack 4 years ago. So this was what our branding looked like at the time. So we've moved on quite a lot, even in terms of branding since then. But the vision of Amberjack was to enable a world in which individuals are hired and progressed solely based on their future potential rather than past experience or privilege. So I was really attracted, and I thought I could add value to the process that Amberjack were looking to follow, which was to take away some of those issues that I spoke about in terms of assessing past leadership and things like that, to help us achieve this vision, because it was something that I really strongly believed in. And I'm really proud of the part that Amberjack played in changing this discussion around from the focus on past experience. And if you come to visit us in our Newbury office, you will see that particularly around that time, we won a lot of industry awards. We got a lot of recognition for the impact we had in moving the story on. So not only in our assessment content, but how we were using technology, how we were making really inclusive processes to help people along. And the reason why we got so recognized is because we became really, really good at answering this question. So, how do we identify the people who will work most effectively in this role for this organization? We got really, really good at doing that, regardless of what level we were looking at, whether it was, as I say, a school leaver, an apprentice program, a graduate program, whatever stream they were looking for. We became really good at identifying those people in a fair and inclusive way that would work most effectively in that role in that organization. And we did that for our future potential model. So, thinking back to what I was saying earlier, often when we're assessing people in early careers roles, there is still a tendency to use models which are designed for experienced higher, more executive levels and sort of just retrofit them to work for early career talent. But Amberjack thought, well, actually, how do we assess future potential from first principles? So in the first iteration of our future potential model, you wouldn't see providing leadership as a behavior we were assessing as such. But what we would say is if you identify people with that combination of grit and applied intellect, they would be the people that will evolve with your organization and bring people with them at the right times. So it worked very effectively for a number of years, and we've still got clients, and we're seeing that the data is still holding up, that it is continuing to work well in terms of predicting performance, but it is starting to creak, both in terms of the predictive power of the assessment itself, which isn't as strong as it was, and also candidate and client feedback on how it's working. So that created a bit of a burning platform to move on and think differently. And when we started to have conversations about this, what we discovered when we analysed all the feedback we were receiving, the conversations we were having, was that actually the question has moved on again, and we're no longer identifying the people for a very specific role in a specific organization. Back to what I was saying in that quote from the World Economic Forum, work is changing rapidly. We need to identify the people who will work most effectively when the work changes. That's what we need to be looking at, and that's what we need to be understanding. So that question and framing that question in a different way really helped mature our thinking. And then what we did is we wanted to come up with a frame of reference for how we discuss this question and how we think about the behaviours that are relevant against this question. And we came up a lot with this emerging talent profile, which is the creative generalist. And as Emily mentioned, in the follow-up materials, there'll be more documentation on what this looks like. But the easiest way to think about this is creative generalists is an emerging profile because it's people who are skilled at using AI as an amplifier while bringing human qualities that AI cannot replicate. I've been having incredibly interesting conversations in the last 2 years. The market has moved on, the assessment market has moved on quicker in the last 2 years, far quicker in the last 2 years than it had in the previous 18 when I've been working in it. And one really interesting conversation comes to mind where we were talking about the integrity of assessment processes. And a client was saying, we're concerned about our online assessment process. We think there might be candidates who are able to create a deep fake version of themselves, which can understand the question that's being asked, process it, think about how to answer, and provide us with a best practice process. What should we do with them? A best practice answer, sorry. What should we do with them in our process to manage that? And my response is, is that not the sort of person you want? So if they're able to show that they're able to work with AI in that way and use technology in that way, as long as they can bring the human qualities that AI cannot replace along with them, that's exactly the sort of person you want. So our model needed to evolve to manage that and to identify that. So we've evolved it into Future Potential Model 2.0. And again, there's going to be a lot more detail that will follow in the follow-up materials that will talk a lot more about the behaviors that underpin it. The ethos is still the same. We want to assess in a way that identifies potential rather than past experience or privilege. But what we have done is we've looked at the latest academic research. We've looked at our over 400,000 candidate data points a year. We've trawled through our fairness data, all of the data that's coming back from our candidate feedback surveys. And we've made improvements both in terms of what we're assessing, how we're assessing it, and how we're presenting the outcomes back to candidates. So let's look at this. So one of the things we've got personality questionnaires that assess against the Future Potential Model 2.0. We have got our online assessments that assess against it, and our bespoke assessment center materials which will assess against this model. So let's say we've got a profile where someone is STEM 10, so a top performer in all of the 12 areas of the Future Potential Model 2.0. So a complete unicorn perhaps, but thinking back to my time at BT, I can think of a colleague who absolutely would have had this profile. I remember when they joined, they were presented with a whole heap of customer data, and they were asked just to look at it and categorize it and make sense of it. They went a lot further than that, and they looked at trends in the data. They wanted to understand and analyze everything they were seeing, and they wanted to be really clear what they were doing and why they were doing it in that way. So in terms of that think pillar, they were really strong in that cognitive ability and communication. They were then able to connect with others where they didn't have the knowledge, to understand from other people's expertise and collaborate with others and get the relevant people on board. They then had the curiosity in the positive change area in that create space to make that change happen and really encourage that change along. And they were absolutely able to deliver. So they had the accountability in the organization to make that happen. That was an outstanding individual. They're still outstanding, still up to, absolutely went flying through the ranks at BT. And thinking about how powerful they will now be with AI at their fingertips with all of that behavioral capability is quite a frightening thought. So that's the sort of thinking behind it and the model. Let's go into a little bit more of the sort of thinking behind the pillars and how they were created. So first of all, in the think area, one of the changes we made is we brought in communication into that think, because what we were finding actually was that whilst some people might be able to have that cognitive ability side, so applying knowledge and intellect to different situations through a considered and flexible approach, they weren't sharing the information in an appropriate way. And so that became an important part of how they were applying their knowledge. And that is quite separate to the connect area and collaboration. Because again, what we were finding is whilst people might be able to communicate very effectively, that was quite different to how they were collaborating and how they were connecting with others. I mentioned we've responded to candidate feedback, and one of the pieces of candidate feedback which I found really interesting from our original model is that one of the pillars we looked at was grit. Now, there were a number of occasions where a candidate would come back to me, and I've spoken to a couple of candidates who would give me really powerful examples of where they demonstrated grit and dealt with really difficult situations in their personal life. So they were saying how challenging it was to see a feedback report telling them that they were struggling in the area of grit. So that again just shows the sorts of information we use to not only think about the behavioral side and make sure we're identifying those creative generalists, but also using this model in a responsible way to present information to our candidates. But a key part of the behaviors that underpin grit is that area of resilience, which is still absolutely key and something we would want to be assessing in early career talent. Now, create, we had a very long discussion about. Create is quite an interesting concept when you're looking behaviorally, because similar to providing leadership, which you wouldn't necessarily expect straight away, strategic thinking. There was a really interesting piece of research done at my old company, Savile Assessment, that looked at how strategic thinking builds over a career. And I guess it makes sense intuitively. As you get more chance to be strategic and think longer term, you will build up those more strategic areas. So there was a discussion about whether how much creates should feature in the future potential model 2.0. But actually, because of thinking about that creative generalist and thinking about how people will use AI and technology as an amplifier, I think we are going to see the importance of create coming up front in those markets. And that's absolutely what the data is showing us. So you want people who are curious, who are seeking new knowledge and understanding by questioning assumptions. And you want those agents of change who are going to make change happen. Something that remains consistent is the importance of the deliver pillar. So for as long as I've been looking at personality research, the area of personality that is most predictive of success has been conscientiousness, which is most closely linked to this deliver area. And that is still showing up in the data as being important. So we had to have that as a factor in the model. And what we wanted, back to that point around the creative generalist and the amplifier, is digitize and how motivated people are for a particular role or organization sits out of the behavioral framework, but is absolutely crucial to how people operate. And then I showed you that sort of unicorn profile. It's much more common to see profiles where people have particular strengths in perhaps one pillar and challenge areas in another. So thinking about this example profile, you've got someone who's very able to use data, understand data, and be really clear what they've gathered from that data. If they are unable to connect with others, to collaborate and grow with others, that will be a challenge. So this is a profile of an individual I was running a coaching conversation with, and it became very clear what was happening very quickly in this situation. So they were saying, I'm well ahead of people. People aren't coming with me. They're not moving as fast as me in this area. And they also were saying this keeps happening. They weren't showing that ability to learn and develop. So you can see how those two areas pull against each other. When we look at create and deliver, it is quite common to see a strength in one and more of a challenge area in another. You're very, very organized, delivery focused people. Are they necessarily the people coming up with the brand new ideas? They do typically pull against each other a little bit. So again, you can see here a profile where someone is going to be very change positive, thinking about different changes and showing that curiosity to make things happen. But without key people around them, they would struggle to deliver on those changes. So quick look about how the profiles can come to life. And what we want to do, thinking about sort of diversity of thought and various things, when using our assessments, there's different combinations of the profile that can achieve, because we're getting a very holistic view of individuals through how we design our assessment processes, which I suppose moves us nicely on to our practical applications. And I think there's an interesting point here about how we identify content for our assessment processes. And I was looking back at some proposals that we've done as recently as 2 or 3 years ago, and looking at the amount of time we spent in that understanding the role in terms of who we were speaking to and getting to the bottom of how that role would work. And what I found is we were probably spending about 2/3 of our time speaking to people currently doing the role and understanding what they do through critical incidents interviews, job shadowing, all those sort of good techniques. We spend far less time, maybe about 22% of the time, with subject matter experts, so the people managing them, and the people who have got really deep technical expertise in a specific area. And we spend the shortest amount of time with the visionaries who would really understand what the future was looking like, what changes have come about which have been really successful in a particular environment. Now, I would say that is now flipping on its head, and there are lots of techniques that can be used using technology and AI available to us to help us do that more future focused research to make sure we're understanding what we're looking for in roles and what the future and what change looks like. And change is is coming. So people are understanding this. So a couple of articles, I could have filled this slide with lots of articles. They're emerging all the time of organizations who are looking to understand, well, how are people using AI? How can they assess the behaviors and also the skills related to how people effectively use AI. So both McKinsey and Sainsbury's, and particularly Sainsbury's in their early careers environment, have gone public in how they're going all in on AI. Now, this is a really important practical application from an assessment perspective. So at Amberjack, one of our key principles is that we see assessment as an extension of attraction. So we want the assessment process to give us robust assessment data, but also get candidates excited about the role they're joining. There are still a large number of organizations who are spending a lot of time thinking, well, how do I deter and detect use of AI in an assessment process? And the way I think about that is if you've got two different candidates applying to two different organizations and one is being told really firmly, you can't use AI in this process, whether that organization is quite AI native and using AI in roles, that will create the impression that they won't be using AI as much. If you've got an assessment process which engages with AI and embraces AI, that will give those organizations a competitive advantage. If I was coming into the job market now and I was comparing two organizations, I would think if there's one that's more likely to let me use AI and understand my AI skills in the role, that would be my preferred destination to give me a competitive advantage over my peers. So our thinking, so organizations are moving in this way. Our thinking is already quite advanced in this, and we have made quite good progress in using an assessment of AI skills to as a sort of framework to assess against the future potential model 2.0. So behaviorally, we're understanding that the bits that of human behavior that augment and get the best out of AI, but we're also assessing how people are using AI. So you can see quite quickly on this slide that we provide, as we always do in our assessment content, high specification consumer grade video content to frame the assessment, bring our clients' EVPs to life and make the assessment really relevant. So in the way the assessment is working, candidates will be introduced to a relevant business challenge and they will be given access to our proprietary LLM, which means it deals with issues around favouring people with experience or privilege. We don't want people acing this assessment just because they're very used to using a particular, perhaps paid for version of a large language model. So they get to work with this to prompt and then review and iterate their prompts and then get to an outcome where they finally get to submit it. But importantly, as well as actually seeing how they're using AI and interacting with it, we get their video responses asking them what they're doing, how they're adapting to what they're receiving, their thought processes as they apply to it. So, as I say, we are assessing key behaviors from the Future Potential Model 2.0 at the same time as understanding how they would use AI in the role. And as I say, if this is for a role where AI is an important component, this will get them excited about the organization they will be joining. So I will quickly show you a video that we've put together that explains this in a little bit more of a dynamic way, just to make sure I've covered off all the key points of how it will work to inform the Q&A session after. And as I mentioned, this video will also be shared with you in the follow-up materials. So something we're understandably very proud of, and again, hopefully in a similar way to how we have in the past, we can start to shape the conversation in the market. So it could be fully branded to organizations. As I say, it will look great, build on that assessment as an extension of attraction ethos. So I suppose, having covered off a few practical applications, I just wanted to finish off on the future potential model, and what's the linking it back to where I was talking earlier, where perhaps I was thinking in terms of, well, how do I prepare my son for the types of roles that might be the roles of the future and the real growth areas. That's the wrong way of thinking about it. What I need to do is just help him prepare so he can think, connect, create, and deliver in the right way when he joins the workplace. And that's what we want to be assessing, and that's what we want to be understanding in our future talent. So I always like to just check in and recap to make sure that I've covered off everything that I said I would. So always sort of challenge and reminder. So I've covered off why this matters now. I've spoken about how talent assessment has evolved. I've introduced you to the concept of the creative generalist and the pillars of the future potential model, and discussed how they sort of interact at quite a high level way and play against each other. We've covered off some practical applications, and we can now move into the Q&A. So this is, I was going to say, this is quite a self-indulgent slide to end on with just a big picture of me, but then I was talking about my journey and my family life for quite a bit of time. So self-indulgence probably isn't a huge amount of a problem for me. But thank you very much for joining the session. There are a couple of QR codes there. If you want to carry on the conversation away from this format, you can send me an email. Please do connect with me on LinkedIn. But Emily, I suppose over to you. Is there any questions coming through?
Yeah, we've had a couple, both actually in relation to the AI assessment. So, the first question was around assessing for AI and whether you can do that against the future potential model and just how that works.
Yes. Oh, yes. So, yeah, good question. So, we are building a set of materials that will assess and making them as generically relevant as we can, and it will assess against the future potential model. We do also have some organizations who are interested in building in their own relevant case studies and materials and the types of things that people will be doing in their roles, and also assessing against their models, which we absolutely can do. It is always our ethos, and we do prefer to build stuff bespoke to client models, and we use our assessment principles to do that. But we've also got the model that's ready to go in the absence of that for our clients.
Okay, perfect. And then the other one was just around explaining in a bit more detail how the AI assessment is scored.
Yes, yes, I should have covered that. If you need to add that into the video, I'd say. So we're doing both ways. We've been scoring the assessment um, through uh, human scoring of the video content, and then we are also building AI models to score it and testing those in the right way. So the way it will work is the system will be able to provide an automated score for the quality of prompts and some automated data around that, assessing the AI skills element of it. The behavioral element will also be able to be scored through the AI scoring mechanisms we're building.
Okay, great, thank you. And we've just had another question come in from Sarah, and her question is, has the model been tested on different global populations?
Yes, so the model has. So one of the great things that's happened since I've joined Amberjack 4 years ago is we've expanded into APAC and got a huge amount of presence there. So it has been used across the geographies that we operate in. Once we've got the full case studies that will be being used to assess the future potential model, we will then be going through a detailed validation process. So between myself and our R&D lead, we will be making sure that it has real the validation process is done very globally, and we will be reaching out to both existing clients and prospects who might be interested in this tool to help us with that validation process, which will be beginning imminently.
Brilliant. Thanks, Martin. That's all the questions that we've had in. Unless there's any last minute ones, if you want to pop them in the chat. But just while I wait to make sure there are no more, just to let you know again, we will follow up with an email which will have a link to the webinar with the papers that Martin has talked about and the video. There'll also be a link in that email should you want to put some time in the diary to chat to us about anything that you've heard today. But just a big thank you from all of us for joining today. Hopefully that's given you some more insight into how we're evolving, and hope you have a good rest of the afternoon.